Paul, actually triggered by that, I'm wondering, do you think there is a kind of global lesson to be learned necessarily from each crisis, even a Pan-African lesson? You're involved with the Africa program at Chatham House. Even a Pan-African lesson to be learned, or do you think often those lessons should be and are much more local depending on the circumstances? There's always a danger in seeing Africa as a whole, isn't it, with whole solutions and whole problems?
Yes, I mean, I would tend to agree with that latter point. I think, yes, one can make some very obvious generalizations that stronger states function better and better analysis, better information, better management helps. But actually, if you look at the crisis in the Sahel, a huge element in it are the local specific factors. And if we just look at the impact the political factors have had on the crisis and how this varies from one country to the next. As Camilla mentioned, the countries are very different, and the level of the type of politics, the way it functions, the way the state functions, the type of services it delivers varies quite dramatically from one country to another. We can just take, for example, the contrast between Mali and Niger. They were both perceived as countries with quite a strong record in grassroots development. Mali had a reputation for having focused on rural issues rather than extravagant white elephant projects, building up food stocks and so on. And yet, as a journalist, when one talks to people who've actually worked in Mali on projects from agencies, time after time after time, they ran into weaknesses in the administration, very large-scale corruption, problems in the political leadership of the development system. And so, for example, the Malian government had a program to provide, nominally, to provide fertilizer at 50% of the commercial price to farmers across the country. But when you actually visited villages, many farmers didn't know the program existed, had absolutely no idea of how they might access it, and the government's ability to sort of follow what it was doing at the local level and ensure that the prices that were passed through the wholesale system actually reached people at the farming level was too weak to deliver the program effectively. Whereas in contrast, in Niger, which is a similarly poor country, arguably fundamentally a poorer country, the local administration does appear to have been stronger. So its capacity to deliver services, to monitor what's actually going on at local level, to report on levels of malnutrition or on farm output or whatever, was much stronger. And that meant that although nominally the government of Mali recognized that there were food crises and responded to them, whereas in Niger you had the Tanja presidency, and Tanja wasn't prepared to allow the word hunger to be used, literally, almost to a caricature level. And there's a famous anecdote of how he was due to visit one region, and there was a poster up for the French NGO Action contre la faim, Action Against Hunger, and the government insisted that the poster had to be taken down or covered up, because when the president saw it, he'd be furious if he saw anything that signaled that there was hunger, despite Niger's status as the third poorest country on earth. And yet, despite all of that weak political leadership at the time at the top, the fundamental strengths of the administration meant that when there was a change in the presidency, donors, even the government machine itself, were able to pick up and react quite quickly because the civil service, the basic collection of data and so on, functioned so much better. And I think that example just highlights how much this is about specifics locally from one place to the next. I don't think one can generalize.
What's your view of the merits of a military intervention in Mali, in northern Mali, to try to remove the present jihadist groups who have a kind of control there, and of the potential consequences of it?
Well, I think if you...
And your reflection on what we heard earlier about that from David and from Jean-Nicolas.
Well, it's obviously going to have a humanitarian impact. I don't see how a major military intervention could not have a humanitarian impact. And there certainly are some reports that local people in Gao, in some areas, in some respect, have experienced some levels of improved security in the very short term against banditry and that sort of thing, because of the ferocity, if you like, of the Islamist groups' rule. However, if you look at it from the point of view of West African governments, and President Ouattara from Cote d'Ivoire was here just 3 months ago talking about this, they are trying to look at the longer term stability of West Africa as a region. And it is a region that has, compared with 15 years ago, for example, made a lot of progress in building a basic structure of stability. Even the way the Cote d'Ivoire crisis was contained, and that ran on for 10 years, but didn't destabilize the region as a whole, exemplifies the progress that's been made in building up basic state stability. And I think ECOWAS sees the appearance of some largely foreign-led, not all of the groups are foreign-led, but two of the main groups are, in northern Mali, effectively just overthrowing the state as a fundamental threat to the entire long-term stability and structure of state entities in West Africa. And for them, I think they would perceive it as an existential threat to the nature of organized government in West Africa. And that's why, despite the risks, they feel that intervention is necessary.